Today we're talking about career options for Citrix. So it's CitrixCoach in a car, coming from the chiropractor, maybe going to get coffee, talking career options. I knew another word was C, but that's all right. Hey everybody, DJ Eshelman here, the Citrix Coach. So what kind of careers do I see people having in Citrix, and how can you get into it is the question. So the first ways that I see usually people get into Citrix, and I'll be honest here, and you can tell me in the comments or the whatever they're called, if you kind of resonate with this, but a vast majority of the people that I've talked to that are in the Citrix world actually would say that they weren't really desiring to get into Citrix necessarily. They were kind of voluntold that either their company bought it and they just now needed to actually do something with it, or somebody quit and they're kind of filling the role. And so, a lot of times with Citrix, and this is really unfortunate, that people didn't really want to be in the roles they're in, which is sad. Now, this thing that's not sad about that, though, is what often happens in that case is people find that they enjoy the technology and want to move up in it. And so what I'm going to talk about today is kind of some ways you can move up in your career and kind of find what fits for you. Fit what finds you find for you. Or something with something else, rhymes with C. Okay, so the first option you probably have, the most likely, is if you are part of a service desk or a help desk and you are going to become a subject matter expert. This is somebody who is among that team, somebody that's learning the technology and how to deal with it the best, or maybe not the best, maybe just the most often. That you're kind of the go-to person whenever there's a situation that looks like it might be Citrix related. They route the ticket to you or the call to you so that you can better help the person on the other end, get their resolution. And so, so that's the subject matter expert. You call it that because the subject matter would be Citrix and you're becoming an expert in it. Now, a little bit of a misnomer because as a subject matter expert, as far as a service desk is concerned, you're probably not any kind of an expert in the technology per se. You're probably more of just somebody who is knowledgeable in how to troubleshoot issues with it. So we move up from there to another level, or what I'll later refer to as lanes, where you switch lanes back and forth. So you have the service desk or the administration lanes, what I call maintain or manage. And so that once you've shifted into that lane, then you are somebody who is actually tasked with the kind of daily care and feeding of a Citrix environment. That usually means things like publishing applications or managing who has an application assigned to them, other assignments within that, or kind of desktop management, that sort of thing, dealing with things like profiles and things like that, just basic administration. And usually what I find here is that pretty rarely is a company these days have a dedicated Citrix administrator, unless they're a lot bigger. If they're a lot bigger, then you really kind of need a few. And there's various schools of thought on this of how many administrators an environment should have. It kind of really depends on the diversity of the user population, how many different types of use cases there are, and overall population in general. And so if you have 2,000 users and you have about 7 different segments for users, you're probably going to need 2 or 3 people that are dedicated so that their time is only spent in the Citrix environment. And the reason that's wise is because you kind of get really good at that, but also you can see problems before they become bigger problems more effectively if you're in it all the time and you're constantly maintaining it. So that dedicated purpose, when you're really focused on that as a career, a lot of times you'll see that as a Citrix administrator, or some people actually attach this to the service desk as well, where they'll have kind of a level 2 or level 3 service desk person also charged with administration of the environment. It just depends on where you're at and where your job has you, I guess, or your work has you. So the other way you can do, the other lane that I find people fit well into is I call it the build lane, or in my methodology, it's the change lane, which kind of doesn't fit with lanes, so I called it build. When you're charged with building tasks, you're more of that engineer, the Citrix engineer, which means that you are tasked with taking a design and, usually, or hopefully taking a design and putting that into action by applying leading practices to making the design work. And so you're actually putting out the servers and configuring them and doing all those kind of behind the scenes work that's kind of outside of a production environment usually. I mean, hopefully. Sometimes that's not really possible. And sometimes engineers are tasked with things like upgrades and things like that, whereas the administrators would be more, in that case, tasked with changes to the desktops themselves, or maintaining the servers for like Windows updates and that sort of thing. The engineers are often more structural in nature, and so they tend to be more skilled in a lot of the ways, and a lot of more experience. Like, usually I recommend that before somebody considers themselves to want to do a Citrix engineer as a job, you really need a good 2-3 years of IT experience before you even try and go into that, because you need to understand the complexities of not only Citrix, but all the systems that are surrounding that, and kind of a good understanding of things like how to structure Active Directory and how to deal with storage and hypervisors and databases. At some level, you need to be understanding that. Now, depending on the size of your organization or the things you're tasked with, there's a lot of different ways you can go with being an engineer. I've seen places have up to 4 or 5 different levels of engineer. You'll have the people that are just basically tasked with the grunt work, if you want to call it that, of building out servers or making structural changes to certain things. Or you kind of a more advanced administrator, where you're in charge of technologies like provisioning services and things like that, where you're maintaining things that you wouldn't necessarily want somebody with less experience handling. And so that can often be a task that's an engineering task. A lot of times you'll also see an engineer that will be tasked with the kind of maintenance of several things, including Citrix. This is where you have your kind of senior engineer general titles, where they are tasked with a lot of different things. And they're usually kind of doing a combination of delegating work, supervising work, and doing work within that a project like that. And so they may not necessarily have direct reports, but they often have a kind of a team lead kind of a position. And then you get into other engineering types that are very often associated with sales roles, where you have a sales engineer or something like that that's actually really tasked with figuring out the needs for a customer and showing them through a proof of concept. So they're usually having to build out at least a demonstration of the technology. It's not necessarily meant to be put into production, but it's really there to demonstrate that cohesiveness with what the customer needs and what the solution provides. And so that's usually what a sales engineer is there for. And then you have some other roles that I don't see them often enough to really get terribly into it with this video, but there are other levels that I've seen of engineers that are out there. From there, you have another lane that I call the design lane, and that is the people that are usually called an architect. Sometimes this can actually be somebody who is a more principal engineer as well. It really depends on your organization. Sometimes this will be the role of a consultant as well. It really does depend. But in general, the architect is the person who takes the use case needs that are identified and translates them into a design or a plan that can be implemented either by others or sometimes even by themselves if they're a consultant. And so that lane, usually you need a lot of experience to be considered an architect. And that's why they're usually people that are paid a lot better and a lot of times have a lot of soft skills that wouldn't necessarily be considered. I'm talking about things like making a presentation to management and things like that, or making quality documentation. Those kind of soft skills are usually something you need as well as the technical skills to be an architect, and so that's something you might need for that. There's some other ways you can kind of build up from there from the architect standpoint to being more of a consultant kind of a thing like I am, where you might be part of an organization as an architect and have kind of a consultancy role where you're really more of a person that just is almost more of a business leader than anything else in the IT organization, where you are constantly aware of the business needs and making sure that they are being met by the technology. This is like your CTO path of a person, whereas somebody in the administration or engineering might take a path that's more administrative in nature. Usually what I find with people that are in the architecture space is that they don't always like to be the people that are responsible for staff, but most of the time they are someone who needs to be at least a thought leader in that regards. And so they're actually setting the tone and the pace for things, and sometimes even running a project in terms of like a principal consultant or a kind of whatever level architect would be doing that for a consulting organization or a reseller, that sort of thing. You might have somebody who is doing that kind of leadership where they're not always necessarily the people that are doing the actual work, or it's kind of a weird way to say that, the implementation, let's put it that way. They're not the ones that are doing the implementation, but they are the ones that are leading the thoughts behind everything, and they fully understand it. And that's the ones that are successful at that are really good at communicating how the needs translate and kind of the why of the solution. The ones that are really good at that kind of go on to some other success lanes that I kind of will say, like, you have people that are just really considered experts. And these are the people that kind of reach beyond just the workplace or just what they do and are known for the technology in their lives. Like, for example, anybody who's like a CTA or CTP or just has a blog, that sort of thing in the Citrix world, they are people that are kind of recognized as experts, and so they can have kind of that, it's kind of a feather in the cap, but it is something that can be kind of as a personal achievement kind of thing in that lane, where you are just kind of being not only recognized for what you're doing, but more importantly, you're contributing to a community as a whole and kind of shaping how Citrix views things. They pay attention to this stuff. They really do. And so it's important to have these people. And then you have the final success lane that I have defined, which I call the authority. These are the people that have kind of taken the next level of that expert to where they are considered a authority in the technology in a certain, whether it's in a certain area of the technology specifically, like application delivery or network or even mobile or SD-WAN or whatever, whatever it is. A lot of times you have established authorities or experts in that area, but authorities in general are those people that are just kind of the go-to. Not a lot of them. You're talking about your like CTP fellows and things, and that's really who I kind of like looked up to these days and really want to be more like. And so yeah, there's an element there of contribution that goes well beyond just what an expert would have, and mostly it's kind of vetted by the public, by you, of who is considered a authority in the marketplace and who is not, kind of thing. It's kind of like pure democracy. So there you have it. There are the various different ways you can have a career in Citrix at a very high level. I probably could dive in a lot more. In fact, in the next couple months, I will be doing just that. I'll be introducing some ways that you can further kind of accelerate your career, going beyond just the technical knowledge, but getting into a lot of the deeper things, which is totally why I'm doing these car chats in the first place. So just gotta get chatty about life when I get in the car. So that's what we do. So anyway, thanks for tuning in, and we will see you hopefully next week for wherever I'm going in the car, probably getting coffee or coming from the chiropractor, because that's what the CitrixCoach do. Cheers, everybody. Chatting about Citrix careers in the car, coming from the chiropractor, wishing I had some coffee because I'm a CitrixCoach. Is that about right?